I'm Melissa.
And I'm Lee, and we are busy mums, company founders, and all-round early learning nerds. Welcome to our podcast, Growing Little Humans.
Kids aren't born with a user manual, so each week we'll try and cover many topics that you guys encounter and worry about each and every day while you're raising your little humans.
Hi, welcome to today's episode, and today we're here to talk about play-based learning.
And today our guest is Dr. Sanobia, and she is an early childhood educational specialist and academic from Sydney, Australia. And currently she is the Director of the Early Years at the Australian International School, Dubai.
Welcome, Dr. Sanobia.
Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. We're really pleased to have you here today to talk about play-based learning because it's such an important topic, and I think probably not enough parents understand what is play-based learning. So shall we start with the basics?
Sure. So play-based learning is terminology we use in education, sometimes to justify why play is in a school environment, in an educational context. Essentially, play is learning. So in that regard, it's much one and the same thing. But when we say play-based learning in any kind of formal educational setting, that is about the way in which children are learning. So it is hands-on, it's interactive, it's led by the children, it's something they are interested in and they are driving. So very different from teacher-led learning.
So there's a difference between children that are playing in the playground and then play-based learning.
Yes. So there's a lot of intentionality and thought behind play-based learning. So in Australia, we follow this cycle where we observe children, then we plan with children, we implement, and we reflect on that. And that's the whole play-based learning cycle of inquiry with young children. So as opposed to children playing in the playground, which has its own benefits because that's unstructured play, there is time and space for that. That should be uninterrupted. But when you're using it intentionally for teaching in a classroom, it's very subtle but strategic. So we say the teacher is the scaffolder, not even a teacher per se, but they are scaffolding, and it's through the play that they scaffold.
Sorry, I'm just going to interrupt you there. What does scaffolding mean?
So scaffolding, if you liken it to an actual building, when you're building a building, you have a scaffold, and that is the structure around it for the building, for the bricks and the rest of the architecture of the building to grow. And just like that, the teacher acts as a scaffold. So we're literally guiding the child's growth and development, but it's happening in its own time, in its own way, through play. But we act as that scaffold. So it's a much more hands-off approach, and it requires trust in children, trust in the process.
And so when, for instance, when children are playing, are you using situational things that are happening like in their day, in their life, to try and maybe encourage play-based learning?
Absolutely. So that's another aspect of play-based learning. We really avoid thematic types of learning. We go with the flow of the children. So whatever the children are interested in, what might be happening. So recently with the flooding that has been happening, we tap into what are they curious about? What are they noticing in their community? And using that as the platform for play and learning, as opposed to some sort of external source of information imposed on them.
So you're not telling them what to play, essentially. You're not trying to encourage them in different topics. You're letting them drive their own play-based learning.
Absolutely.
And you were talking about how you set up that within the classroom. What does that look like?
So another thing we often say, and this comes from the Reggio approach, which lots of early years practice follow. So that idea that the environment is the third teacher. And so we use our environment very intentionally to be part of the play environment. So for example, we only ever provide environments and resources that are open-ended. So things like pebbles, stones, rocks, blocks are going to have much more potential than a toy that has a beginning, middle and an end. And that's probably the biggest difference between play at home, as the average person may understand, a toy that you press a button, it lights up and yay, they did it. That's very closed-ended play. What we're talking about is very open-ended play that leads to deep engagement. And because that stone or that rock could be 100 different things across the week.
Right, so they're using their imagination a lot.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I know a lot of the parents I've spoken to have always asked about, okay, play-based learning, how does that prepare children for formal schooling?
Yeah. I think that's a great question. I was just recently having a conversation with a lady who teaches in a business school, and she was saying, when we have these business leaders come into our college, they want open-minded thinkers, they want independent thinkers, critical thinkers, people who think outside the box. And I just thought to myself, goodness, that's exactly what a play-based curriculum inculcates. So it really starts from the youngest of age, this idea that there's not one correct answer, that we work collaboratively to solve problems, that it's about the human aspect of teamwork and human dynamics. It's not just about a textbook and a black and white answer. And these are all the things that very complex play-based environments can teach. Because that's the real world, learning to compromise and take turns and not jumping in and solving problems for children, letting them negotiate and figure out those sticky bits, and that's real life. And that prepares them for school, because when we move through the Australian curriculum in particular, it is about learning for life. It is about those 21st century learners, and so we're really trying to set them up to be successful and be hungry for that kind of way of learning when they progress to formal schooling.
And it's, Melissa and I are constantly talking about how the early years are the foundational years for children's education, and that's a perfect example of, being able to, talk about something that's going on in early years and directly put it against, an adult implication that, these are people that are critical thinkers, they think outside the box, and it's amazing when you make that connection from an early years practice.
Yeah. And it's amazing that those little ones are talking about things that are going on in the world, like you said, about the floods and things. So it's very, very exciting, isn't it, for them?
Yeah.
So what advice would you say, we sort of just diverged a bit and talked about parents at play at home, but any recommendations you can give to parents about what they can buy to support play-based learning in their home?
Actually, there's probably little you can buy. I think the best play are the open-ended, we call it heuristic play, basically the pots and the pans and the spoons and the stones and the rocks and the leaves and trees, things that don't actually have one purpose. I know as a parent, I actually rarely buy toys for my toddler. It is just what we find in the environment, because she's anyway going to play with the box rather than the toy itself. So it really is about things that have multiple purposes, things that don't have a beginning, a middle and an end. And that would be my biggest suggestion for parents. Just because it's expensive doesn't mean that it's any good.
It's a better resource.
And just because it says the word educational on it doesn't mean that it is.
That it is.
Actually educational.
Yes, my husband likes to tell a story about the best gift he ever got was a cardboard box for Christmas, and the endless
potential
play that he had with that for 12 months. So
absolutely.
And it's true, we always talk about our children getting their presents, and they play more with the wrapping and the box than perhaps they play with the toy.
Exactly.
And I know a lot of the time in the classroom they'll leave things out for kids to just continually to add to. Would you recommend that for parents at home, than packing up at the end of every day, pack up your toys and put them away? Would you recommend to leave them out for children to...
Yeah, I think when we talk about that, we talk about there's a bit of a balance with that. I think tidy environments teach children respect for their belongings, and it's inviting environments encourage children to come along. So what we do say is that when you're finished with an area, if it's something you're still working on, so if it's construction that's been worked on for the last few days, then absolutely we respect that and we leave that. But if it's just something that you've explored and you're ready to move on, then returning things in their rightful place is part of the learning.
It's also a learning experience.
Because then it's inviting for your friends to come in and join along. So in a home environment, it is about striking that balance between, is this something you'd like to continue after we, go to the park for a walk, or after dinner? Is this something you want to continue? Then absolutely, I respect that, and let's leave it here. But if it's something that we're done with, then let's tidy up and put it away.
Okay. And I know developmentally a lot of little ones will play initially by themselves before they start to play with a friend. How do you encourage them for that holistic social development in play-based learning?
So we really go with the flow of children, and developmentally there are, average ages at which things happen. But each child is different depending on their home environment, depending on, what their context has been before they come into an early years classroom. And it's about supporting their social development where they're at. It might literally be for some children taking them from playing solely individually to parallel playing with somebody. And that could go on for weeks and months, that merely having someone beside me playing blocks, but their own structure is where that child is at. And through that teacher scaffolding, for example, she may say something like, oh, I noticed little Tommy is also trying to build a tall tower. Maybe you could work together to build a tower together. And in those small ways, those little bridges are starting to be built, and encouraging it gradually. Other children enter early years classrooms quite confidently wanting to interact and play together. For them, it might be about how to do that in a civilized way, in a way that's going to be pro-social. And then you've got children who are now at our school leaving us about to enter prep, who are talking very articulately about that was unacceptable and I feel this way, and this is all part of the learning in the classroom. That social behaviour is all day, every day.
And Dr. Sanobia, do you find that play-based learning is something that happens predominantly in the early years, or does that continue on into an elementary schooling
I
as
think
well?
traditionally it has only been in the early years, but I am seeing a shift, and I hope to see a greater shift and a growth, because I think that play doesn't leave us even as adults. When we think about what people say, what are you doing on the weekend? It probably involves a hobby. That playful mindset, that playful attitude, if you are in a job that requires creative thinking or independent thinking, or you're in leadership, you need a playful mindset. If things are tough, you have to be a bit lighthearted about
adaptable,
things. Yeah, so I would like to see that playful attitude to being creative and being a bit of a divergent thinker continue throughout schooling, because I do see a place for it.
No, it definitely seems to be when they get to a certain age, it's all of a sudden sitting at your chair and doing your work, and
traditionally so.
Much more academic, and it loses that. So it's really lovely to see with the children.
Yeah.
So in my experience, parents will come in and they'll be touring the school, and we'll talk about play-based learning, and then they will ask that question. So play-based learning, that's great, but when do they learn how to read and write?
Yep, absolutely. And so I often, when I do get asked that similar question, I liken it to a tree, and I say, what we're doing in the early years is laying the foundation and developing the real solid roots of the tree. We know gradually in time, and there are many parts of the world which research shows that this is evidence-based, that by the age of 6 and 7 is when a child is cognitively capable of sitting, concentrating, having the fine motor skills to form letters and to start writing. What we do is start teaching them how to have that core strength when they're balancing, when they're risk-taking, so that they can have the correct writing posture. What we're doing is starting to get them really good with their fingers so that they can hold a pencil with confidence. And these are the ways in which we've developed the roots of the tree. In addition to that, it's individualized. So if we notice through play that a child is really eager and curious at story time to make sense of that word, then we take them further. Some children are absolutely ready for formal literacy experiences, formal numeracy experiences, and a play-based curriculum allows for that, because there is no beginning, middle and end. It truly is child-driven. So that same experience for one child could be writing a menu in the shop corner. For another child, it might be rocking the dolly in the home corner. And both are engaged in play at the level that is meaningful to them.
And a lot of the play-based learning would be, let's say they're playing with their rocks and then they're counting how many rocks they have.
Absolutely.
So they're learning numeracy like in a play experience. They're not formally being, sitting there on rote learning 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Absolutely. And that's something quite unique in our Australian curriculum, in our Australian education system. Teachers are trained, with 4-year degree in early years. So they're quite skilled in knowing, that child could really be extended a little bit with counting those pebbles, and that child actually could require a bit of extension with, removing some of the pebbles and even going into subtraction. But there is no checklist per se that a child by the age of, play-based learning must be able to, do this and do that. There is a lot of teacher discretion based on the children in front of her.
And is there any assessment that's involved with play-based learning?
So we have the Australian Early Years Learning Framework. It is a framework, not a curriculum per se. And the assessment is all about the children. So our assessment happens through observing the children, reflecting on that observation, evaluating it, and planning based on children. So it is a very qualitative, observational data collection type of way of working with young children, rather than quantifying or ticking things off in regards to what they're capable of or not capable of.
Okay.
And Dr. Sanobia, as you know, I'm not an educator. And so just as a mum, when I'm looking for, if I've got a 2-year-old or a 3-year-old and I'm thinking about putting them into an early learning centre, is play-based learning something that's happening in like all of the common curriculums, as in American or British or Montessori, for instance?
I would say that most places say they are, because it's the buzz at the moment. But as a parent, I always say use your gut feeling is number one when you're picking a space for your children. But number two, if it's truly play-based, it needs to be driven by the children. So some places, some curriculums are moving towards what they call play-based. However, there are still definitive topics that must be covered across the year. So next week is dinosaurs, the week after that is volcanoes, and so on and so forth. And in that way, while it might look like the children are involved in using manipulatives, play has to be child-driven and child-led. And for it to be meaningful, sustained play, that has to come from the children. If it's not coming from the children, then it's hands-on activities, but not necessarily play.
Not play-based.
So that would mean like, as the teacher, I would put dinosaurs out on the table, whereas for the children, they would go and choose the dinosaurs for themselves or whatever they wanted to play with.
Absolutely.
Okay.
So basically, if the Early Learning Centre had a thematic calendar that, 1 month we're doing summer, 1 month we're doing dinosaurs, 1 month we're doing space, that means that it's not a true play-based learning environment.
Not in its authentic self. So the children might be playing based on those themes, but how many of those children are truly deeply engaged in that because they didn't choose that topic? So when we define play, we talk about it being intrinsically motivating. That means that it has to be something the child wants to do from within. It's not a game, so there's no winner or loser. That's quite different from play. Play is purposeful for the sake of play, and that's the beauty of it. It's simply beautiful for the sake of play, and so it didn't need to be there was no adult involved in orchestrating that.
And I guess that would mean too that true play-based learning, one child might be choosing to play with a dinosaur while another child might choose to play with a truck, or they might choose to read a book instead of, everybody being driven towards the same play topic.
Absolutely. And it's the skilled teacher who is observing what are they doing with the dinosaur, what are they doing with the truck, and what are they doing with the book. Because without that skillful eye, you could get stuck in a rut, because that child might be interested in dinosaurs for months. And you certainly can't just do dinosaurs for a whole academic year. It's about eliciting what is actually going on here. Is there language and literacy in that play with the dinosaur? And can we maybe bring, if that particular child never goes to the book corner, maybe we can get some books about dinosaurs and bring them to the dinosaurs. Maybe we can start counting the dinosaurs. So the skillful teacher is using those interests and then driving their learning from a strengths-based perspective.
Well, thank you so much for joining us today, Dr. Sanobia.
And one of the reasons why we wanted to talk to you today about play-based learning is because in the Wishing Tree, we are following the Early Years Learning Framework, and a part of that being play-based learning. So I'm sure you've given our listeners quite a bit to listen to today, and a few more questions that they will have. And if they have any questions for you, Dr. Sanobia, we can leave your email address.
Yes, absolutely. And you're welcome to visit us at the Australian International School in Dubai.
Thank you very much for coming today.
Thank you.
And here come the legals. Our podcast is purely brought to you for educational and entertainment purposes. We are just two hectic mums and we are certainly not licensed therapists.
This podcast is not intended as a substitute for the advice of licensed or qualified professionals. And if you do need some help, please seek out some professional advice.